Let's move on to, okay.
Yeah.
So the next presentation is by Abe. So Paulo, could you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, Abe, now the floor is yours.
All right, wonderful. Can you see my screen all right?
Yes, please go ahead.
Fantastic. Well, first, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Dr. Sayama. Thank you to the organizers. I'm going to be presenting some work that I and my advisor, Eduardo Izquierdo, have been doing on generating reward structures on dynamics tasks for the sake of understanding learning behavior. So first, I want to bring in some of our inspirations. So living organisms can learn all sorts of novel behaviors that certainly not all organisms in their evolutionary heritage have needed to learn, and some behaviors that probably no organisms in our evolutionary heritage have needed to learn. For example, humans can drive, a monkey can be trained to ride a bicycle, a dog can learn to run with 3 legs. So a question that has emerged recently is, well, and frankly for the full duration of artificial life has been on many people's minds, is what sorts of conditions or objectives can give rise to lifelike behavioral versatility in the artificial context. So some recent approaches have included some work in the Evolved Policy Gradients paper by Huthoft and al., where they showed that if you have a virtual ant and you train and you develop a learning strategy that trains ants to go to the right, that learning strategy can also lead the ants to go to the left if you give them the appropriate rewards. We've also found in O et al.'s paper, Discovering Reinforcement Learning Algorithms, that if you develop a learning strategy on grid world and Markov decision discrete state and action tasks, that strategy can generalize quite impressively to Atari games. So we're wondering what sorts of conditions would be needed to get lifelike behavioral versatility on a full range of dynamics style tasks that are more biologically plausible perhaps than these Atari games. Our more specific question in this work is somewhat narrower. What sets of dynamics and reward structures, or in short, what tasks, are useful when assessing agents' behavior learning capabilities? Naturally, if we were to have some set of tasks that was good at assessing these capabilities, then we would be able to use that for purposes of meta learning, for purposes of assessing multitask learning, and for a variety of other reasons. So our contributions in this work are threefold. First, we introduce a parameterized distribution of classic control style environments in the continuous domain. We share an empirical metric for how non-trivial it is to solve a task and some critiques of this metric. And finally, we share a data-driven analysis of which ways of generating reward structures on environments lead to non-trivial tasks according to our metric. I'll start with our distribution of tasks. Our distribution of dynamics. So first, I just want to quickly share the agent environment paradigm. So in this paradigm, sometimes known as a reinforcement learning paradigm, we have an agent that that contributes actions to a body environment system, which in turn provides observations to the agent. So here I'm conceptualizing of the agent as perhaps the nervous system. Some other people might draw their boundary between the body and environment, but in this case, I really care about how the sorts of signals that the nervous system provides to the body in order to perform behavior. The body environment system also provides rewards or fitness that are used to assess the agent, perhaps to give the agent feedback and to understand how well the agent is learning. An example of this sort of agent environment system is the pendulum balancing or pole balancing task, in which an agent needs to provide a torque to balance a pendulum pointing upwards. On this plot on the left, I have in color the reward structure, where you don't want to be at the bottom, you want to be balancing your pendulum at the top. I also have shown that the angle of the pendulum is shown by the angle along this circle or this ring, and that the angular velocity omega is shown by how inwards or outwards are you along this ring. On the right, I've shown the same trajectory but over time, with the action in purple, the bounded, which is to say the angular velocity variable, in green, and the cyclic, which is to say the angle variable, in blue. I've also shown the reward, and as we can see, the reward begins to go up once the agent has balanced more or less the pendulum at the top. These tasks are generally dictated by their dynamics, and in particular, the way that the current states and the actions give rise to the rate of change of the state. So here I've drawn that process by using 5 different plots, one for each of some sampled actions. In theory, there's a continuum of these plots in between these as well. So we have the direction in which the state will evolve with these arrows, and when the arrows are dark, that shows that there is a rapid change. When they are light, that shows that there is a slight change. Of particular interest are the fixed points at which the rate of change is 0, and those are shown with the black and green points here. There will also be some blue and red points that I will discuss later. So in our distribution, our key players are the state variables, which are inspired by natural nonlinearities. We have 2 classes of state variables. First, we have cyclic variables, which are designed to model processes where if you keep going, you end up where you started. For example, if I spin in circles, at a certain point, once I've spun in the circle all the way around, I'll be facing the same direction that I started in. These live on the circle, and they are observed and play and interact with the other variables through their sine and cosine, which is to say their x and y coordinates if we map them on the unit circle. We also have bounded variables, which live in the interval -1 to 1. This means that our state space is compact, which does provide certain advantages to analysis. Finally, we have the action variables, which are provided by the agent and live within the interval -1 to 1 as well. Our evolution rule is that the rate of change for each cyclic and bounded variable is a polynomial function of the action, the sine of the cyclic, the cosine of the cyclic, and the bounded variables. These functions are parameterized by the indices of each action, bounded and cyclic variable that comprise their terms, and the coefficients of the terms. So here those indices are the aij, and the coefficients are the ki. We have t terms of up to degree d. X here is representing the concatenation of the action sine of cyclic, cosine of cyclic by constrained variables, and 1, which is used for cases where the degree of a term is less than d. So one example of the evolution rule is where we are capable of representing the rule of the inverted pendulum task. In this case, the cyclic variable is the angle, the bounded variable is the angular velocity, and the action variable is the torque. So here the cyclic variable changes at 8 times the bounded variable. The bounded variable changes at 6/8 of the torque, minus this factor with the cosine of the cyclic variable, which is used to represent the force of gravity pulling down the pendulum. We can also generate brand new sets of dynamics. So here's one particular set of dynamics that I'm going to be using for our examples for the rest of the presentation. Here we can see that we have some fixed points. We have these blue stable fixed points on the left and right. We also have a green saddle fixed point, which is attractive along one axis and repulsive along another axis, which is has a slightly more negative bounded variable than the stable one here, but a similar cyclic variable. All of these occur when the action is at 0.5, positive 0.5. At other actions, the locations of these fixed points and the dynamics will be different. the reward structure on our distribution is flexible. We can have a reward rule follow the same form as our state evolution rule. We could also generate it in a variety of different ways based on the dynamics, as I will discuss in part 3. I now want to briefly talk about our empirical metric for non-triviality. So we're building on the intuition that a task is non-trivial if there is some sort of behavior that results in qualitatively different trajectories that are significantly better than random behavior, that this behavior can be discovered by our learning process, and that our behavior takes significant learning time to find. That does mean that this non-triviality is in a dynamic between the task and the learning process. To be more precise, we're introducing this metric called time in convergence, which is defined as the proportion of the time that runs have converged to 95% normalized of the best fitness. In this particular example, we have 10 runs, which on average surpass that threshold at generation 79.3 out of 100, meaning that they have on average converged 20% of the time. This can also be calculated as the area under the cumulative convergence histogram, which I have shown on the right. This metric does a good job of detecting whether behaviors are non-trivially discoverable. However, it does a poor job of detecting whether the behaviors are qualitatively different from random behavior, as I will discuss shortly. Finally, our data-driven analysis. So we have some intuitions that led us to propose these ways of generating reward structures. Biological life is characterized by maintaining highly improbable states. At thermodynamic equilibrium, we've all combusted. So homeostasis is an example of an improbable state that life maintains. In addition, reaching improbable states requires the most intervention, the most behavior. For example, it requires a lot of behavior and a lot of care to go from a messy room to a clean room, but it requires much less intervention to go from a clean room to a messy room. So here, I hope that my screen is not covering this. Our question is, which states are improbable? Because our intuition would be that incentivizing those improbable states would result in non-trivial learning. I'm going to take two approaches. First, we have the empirical approach, which is a global approach. We run the simulation many times with different initial conditions and different fixed actions and observe the most frequently hit states to understand which states are probable. We also have a local approach, the analytic approach, where we locate the fixed points of the task dynamics across different actions, and then we use a dynamical systems analysis to calculate the fixed points' local stability. There's a trade-off between these, because the global approach is able to capture the non-local dynamics, such as limit cycles. It can operate in a black box manner, even if we don't have access to the dynamics. But on the other hand, it requires exponential computational resources as the number of state and action variables increases. So some examples of applying the global empirical approach. Here we have on our set of dynamics that we introduced before, a number of different actions, and what I've plotted here are the points that are most frequently reached when we run time forward using these different sets of actions. So as you can see, we have a stable limit cycle when the action is -1. We have some very attractive points with a kind of upper left-hand cyclic variable and a negative bounded variable. And we have some spiraling behaviors that seem to be quite slow with the positive action variables. So in this framework, if we were to incentivize the stable states, the probable states, we would make this point very high reward, we would make these points high reward, and we would make the darker color or purpler color low reward. If we were to disincentivize the probable states, then we would make all of those low reward and make the purple areas high reward. In the analytic approach, we look for all of the fixed points, and we see here some stable fixed points in blue, saddle points in green, non-hyperbolic points, which are neither attractive nor repulsive along some local axis in black, and the unstable points, which are repulsive in red. If we wanted to incentivize hitting improbable states, we might use a proxy of incentivizing these unstable points and perhaps also slightly incentivizing the saddle points and strongly disincentivizing the stable points. We could also take an approach where we incentivize the stable points to see what happens if we incentivize hitting probable points in state space. Finally, I also tested out an analysis where I incentivized the saddle points. So to share what I'm using as my kind of framework, we have 3 different sets of initial conditions that we're visualizing. I did this analysis with a number of different initial conditions. We're going to optimize agents on all of these different approaches. And then we're going to analyze which of those approaches had greater time and convergence and which of those approaches were more qualitatively different. So here you can see the distribution of different states that are likely to be reached from our sets of initial conditions. So these are using random initialized policies. We see here with the analytic treatments, with the stable analytic treatment, we have the following time and convergence. We have the following evolution plot. We have these additional evolution plots here. I used an evolutionary optimization to develop my policies. We could also have used a reinforcement learning optimization, and all of the analyses would have been the same. You can see that each of them reach different points in the state space according to the incentives that I provided in the reward structure. Here we have the empirical treatments, where we similarly will be approaching different points depending on what was incentivized in the reward structure. Finally, I have a uniform approach where I used no information from the dynamics. What we found was that the reward structure predicts the time and convergence, but not in the direction we expected. We found that the stable treatments ended up with a lower time and convergence, meaning less triviality, than the unstable approaches. So why was that the case? Our best explanation is that we have a case of fine-tuning versus innovation. So when we have a stable situation, then you start out in the right ballpark. As you can see, the trajectories for the stable cases are all within the distribution of the random trajectories. So that means that most of the time in evolution was spent fine-tuning. On the other hand, in the unstable cases, we do have these qualitatively different trajectories, meaning that we have bona fide innovation where we jump from one particular policy to some completely different policy. And that effect takes up the lion's share of our fitness, normalized fitness space, meaning that even though we might seem to have a more interesting behavior here, we nevertheless spend more time by our definition in convergence.
Abe, could you wrap up, because
Yes.
we are running out of time? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. So our kind of takeaway and future direction is that we need an improved metric that is capable of recognizing qualitatively different trajectories. And I have been looking for these, looking for inspiration from information theory, from probability theory. I would love to hear any suggestions that all of you have, either now or following over the Slack or over email. So to summarize, these are our contributions. I won't lay them out right now, but I will leave this open during questions. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Very nice presentation work. So time for maybe one quick question from the audience. Anyone, feel free to unmute. Maybe I can just ask one quick question. So instead of using reward structure, is it also possible to include the action as part of a dynamical system and then reanalyze its local stability, so that you can design the action based on the local stability, so that the target state is becoming actually stable. Is it possible mathematically?
That is possible, but that would require us to pull the agent into our dynamical systems analysis, which might be somewhat beyond my personal expertise.
Okay.
But that certainly is a very interesting, I appreciate that suggestion a great deal. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Maybe one more quick question, if there's any. If not, thank you very much, Abe, for the great work. So now time for the third speaker, Doug Kirkpatrick, who is here.